I set my fork down, folded my napkin across my lap, and looked my father-in-law directly in the eyes for the first time in 11 years of marriage. "I don't think I heard you correctly," I said. The dining room went quiet in that particular way that happens when 40 people simultaneously decide to stop pretending they aren't listening. He said it again. Slower this time, the way he spoke to waitstaff he found insufficiently attentive. "You're not welcome at the reading. This is a family matter." I was sitting at his family's table. I had been sitting at this family's table every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every Christmas Eve for over a decade. My daughter, his granddaughter, was upstairs right now, asleep in the guest room, with her shoes still on, because she'd crashed during the drive and my husband had carried her in without waking her. And Frederick Holt, my father-in-law, sitting at the head of his mahogany dining table, in his house in Asheville, North Carolina, had just told me, in front of his entire extended family, that I was not welcome at his mother's will reading. His mother. My husband's grandmother, the woman who had called me every Sunday for 9 years. I picked my fork back up. I cut a piece of roast. I chewed it, and I thought about the last phone call I'd had with Grandma Opal. My husband's name is Bennett. We met in our late 20s at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Charlotte, and we got married 3 years later in a small ceremony at a state park, because that's what we both wanted. No ballroom, no ice sculpture, just our people, a string quartet, and good catering. His family was polite about it, the way people are polite when they are quietly horrified. The Holts are what I would describe as aggressively established. They have been in Western North Carolina for 4 generations. They have a family foundation. They have a family attorney. They have opinions about the right way to do things, and the right way is always the way that has been done before. I am from Tucson. My mother taught middle school science. My father managed a hardware store until he retired. We were not aggressively established. We were just people who lived carefully and loved each other well, and when I married Bennett, I understood that his family would never fully understand that. What I did not expect was how long Frederick would work to remind me of it. It started small, the comments about where Bennett and I chose to live. Probably not Asheville, which apparently said something about our priorities. The raised eyebrow when I kept my last name professionally. The way he introduced me at his club dinners as Bennett's wife, for years before he learned that I had a name, and even then he used it like a concession. Frederick didn't dislike me personally. I don't think he thought of me enough for personal dislike. I was simply a variable in his son's life that he had not approved, and therefore did not fully acknowledge. Bennett saw it. We talked about it. He confronted his father twice, early in our marriage, and both times Frederick responded by going very still and very quiet, in a way that made the air in the room feel pressurized. And both times his mother, Loretta, came to find Bennett afterward to explain that his father meant well, and didn't always express himself the way he intended, and could we all just move forward? So we moved forward, and every Sunday, Grandma Opal called. She was Frederick's mother's, which I never entirely understood because she was nothing like him. She was 81 years old, and she lived alone in a farmhouse outside of Waynesville, that she had refused to leave despite everyone's persistent suggestions, and she made her own bread, and kept a garden, and had opinions about every book she read, that she would share with you, at length, whether you had read it or not. She called me Juniper. My name is June, but she said Juniper had more spine to it and she liked to think of me as having spine. Juniper, she said, the Sunday before everything happened, I want you to know something. Okay, I said. I was in my kitchen in Raleigh, making coffee, and my daughter Vivi was doing homework at the counter next to me. I see you, she said. I want you to know that I always have, and when the time comes, things are going to make sense. Don't let them rattle you. I didn't know what to make of that. I asked if she was feeling all right. She said she was feeling perfectly fine, and then she asked to talk to Vivi, and they spent 20 minutes discussing whether a hot dog was a sandwich. And that was the last time I spoke to her. She died 11 days later, heart failure, in the night, in her own bed, in the house she had refused to leave. The Thanksgiving gathering was 3 weeks after the funeral, which in retrospect was too soon. But the Holts had hosted Thanksgiving for 30 years, and Frederick was not the kind of man who allowed grief to disrupt a schedule. The table seated 20 comfortably, and we had overflow into the formal sitting room. I counted 41 people at some point during the appetizer course. I had cried at Grandma Opal's funeral. Frederick had not, or if he had done it somewhere private. He gave the eulogy. It was competent and accurate, and it described a woman I only partially recognized. At Thanksgiving, he was already back to himself. Presiding. Directing the conversation the way he directed everything, firmly, with the implicit understanding that deviation would be noted. He announced over the salad course that the estate attorney would be meeting with the family on Friday. It was a formality, he said. His mother had always made her wishes known, and the family could expect the process to be straightforward. I noticed, he said the family. I did not say anything. After dinner, while the men drifted toward the living room, and the women drifted toward the kitchen, in a dynamic that had survived into the 21st century, purely through the force of Frederick's gravitational pull, my sister-in-law Phoebe found me by the coffee station. Phoebe is Bennett's older sister. She had always been the kind of friendly that keeps one hand on the door handle. "Are you coming Friday?" she asked. "I assumed so," I said. She looked at her coffee. "Daddy mentioned it might be just immediate family for the first part." "I'm immediate family." She stirred her coffee. "You know how he is." I did know how he was. I had known for 11 years. I told Bennett that night, in the guest room, with Vivi asleep between us on the bed in that way. She still did sometimes, even at 9 years old. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would handle it. I told him I didn't need him to handle it. I just wanted him to know. He reached across Vivi and squeezed my hand. "She loved you," he said. "Whatever happens Friday, she loved you." "I know," I said. And I did know. I just didn't know yet what she had done about it. Thanksgiving dinner the next day was the moment Frederick said it out loud. We were near the end of the main course. Someone had asked about the estate timeline. One of the cousins, a man named Chip, who wore a Vineyard Vines vest at every occasion, including funerals, and Frederick had begun to explain the process. And then he turned to me with that particular expression of his, the one that was technically a look of consideration, and he said that the reading on Friday would be limited to direct family members, and that he hoped I would understand. He said it, the way you say something you've already decided, to someone whose agreement is a formality. The table got quiet. I set my fork down. "I told you how that went. What I didn't tell you is what happened after. Because after I set my fork down and looked at him and said I didn't think I heard him correctly, and he said it again, slower. After all of that, I folded my napkin, pushed back my chair, and said, very quietly, 'All right,' and I went upstairs. Not because I was submitting. Not because he was right. I went upstairs because I had learned, in 11 years, that the most powerful thing I could do in Frederick Holt's house was remove myself from a room and let him feel the specific discomfort of having said something cruel in front of 40 people, while the target of that cruelty simply declined to perform her pain for the audience. I heard the conversation resume below me, the clinking of silverware, Frederick's voice, confident, redistributing the moment. I sat on the edge of the bed next to my sleeping daughter, and I thought about what Grandma Opal had said. "Don't let them rattle you." I did not go to the reading on Friday. Bennett went. He was gone for 3 hours. I took Vivi to the botanical garden, and we looked at the late-season chrysanthemums, and she asked me why some flowers bloom right before winter, and I told her that some things save their best for last. She thought about that for a moment, and then asked if we could get a pretzel, and I said yes. When Bennett called, I was sitting on a bench near the entrance watching Vivi negotiate with a squirrel over the last of her pretzel. "June," he said. Something in his voice made me straighten up. "You need to come," he said. "Can you come now? Can you bring Vivi to my mom's sister and come to the attorney's office?" "What happened?" He was quiet for a second, then, "Grandma Opal changed her will. 8 months ago. There's a trust. And her attorney, not the family attorney, a different one, someone she hired separately. She's been waiting to speak with you specifically." I stood up. The squirrel finally got Vivi's pretzel. She laughed. "Bennett," I said. "What did she do?" "She left you the farmhouse," he said, "and the land. And there's a letter. June, there's a letter she wrote for you, and she asked the attorney to give it to you in person, not at the group reading. She planned this." I sat back down on the bench. Around me the chrysanthemums were gold and rust, and the particular orange that looks like something ending and beginning at the same time. I thought about every Sunday phone call. I thought about the bread she had sent us at Christmas, wrapped in dish towels, with a note that said the recipe was in the wrapping if I knew where to look. I had kept those dish towels without knowing why. I thought about "I see you, Juniper." The attorney's name was Miss Tran. She had an office in downtown Asheville, on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old wood and coffee, and she shook my hand with the particular steadiness of someone who has delivered significant news many times and has learned to hold the room. She had me sit across from her desk. Bennett's sat beside me. She had already met with the family, she said. She had already explained the primary elements of the estate. "Before I give you this," she said, placing an envelope on the desk between us, "I want to explain a few things about the structure, because Opal was very specific and she wanted you to understand why." Grandma Opal, Ms. Tran explained, had established an irrevocable trust 14 months ago, naming me as the primary beneficiary of the farmhouse property and its surrounding 22 acres. She had also named me as the sole beneficiary of a separate investment account that had been quietly accruing for the better part of a decade. The total value of those combined assets was something I will not repeat here because it still doesn't feel entirely real, and because that's not actually the point. The point is that she did it 14 months ago. 14 months, which means she started the process while she was healthy, while she was clear. while Frederick was presumably still operating under the impression that his mother's estate would flow through channels he understood and influenced. An irrevocable trust, Mrs. Tran explained with the slight emphasis of someone who has explained this to resistant people before, cannot be contested once it has been established. It exists outside of the traditional probate process. It does not require family consensus. It is, by design, beyond reach. She was very thorough, Mrs. Tran said, almost to herself. She was, I agreed. Then she handed me the envelope. I read it in the car, while Bennett drove and Vivi slept in the back seat with her head against the window the way she always did on long drives. I read it twice. I won't share all of it because some things are private. But there's a part I keep coming back to. I have watched you sit at that table for 11 years, she wrote, and absorb what that table dishes out without losing yourself in it. That is not weakness, Juniper. That is the hardest kind of strength there is. I want you to have something that is yours, not given to you through Bennett, not tolerated by his father, not contingent on anyone's approval. The farmhouse was mine. Now it is yours. Come home to it whenever you need to. Come home to it. I didn't cry until I got to that sentence. Bennett reached over without looking and put his hand on mine, and I let him. And Vivi slept on in the back like nothing in the world had changed, even though everything had. We drove back to the Holt house that evening, because we had left luggage and because Bennett, to his credit, believed in finishing things. I had Vivi on my hip when we came through the door, half asleep, her head on my shoulder. Frederick was in the study. The door was partially open. He was on the phone, and I could hear him even from the hallway, talking to someone. The family attorney, I assumed. His voice carrying that particular tone of a man who has just discovered that a plan he thought was settled is not settled at all. She had her own counsel? I heard him say. For how long? I kept walking down the hall. Loretta found me in the guest room while I was zipping up Vivi's bag. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked older than she had at Thanksgiving dinner, which had been 2 days ago. She didn't tell anyone, Loretta said finally. Not an accusation. Just a fact. No, I said. Did you know? No, I said. But she told me not to let them rattle me. I think that was as much as she could say. Loretta looked at the floor for a moment, then she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Something that looked like it cost her something. She talked about you, Loretta said. When she'd call me, she'd mention what you two had talked about. Books, Vivi, things Bennett didn't even tell us. She stopped. I should have paid more attention to that. I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything useful I could have said. He's going to make this difficult, she said. Frederick. He's going to say things were undue that she wasn't. She established the trust 14 months ago, I said. When she was healthy, her attorney documented everything. Ms. Tran was very clear about the legal standing. Loretta looked at me for a long moment. You're going to be all right, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. She nodded once, slowly, and then she left, and I finished zipping the bag. Frederick did try. Of course he did. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, his family attorney sent several letters. There were discussions of contesting, of questions about capacity, of the timing of the trust establishment. Each time, Ms. Tran responded with documentation. Each time, the response from their side came back quieter than the last. You cannot contest an irrevocable trust that was established by a mentally competent adult with independent legal counsel and thorough documentation. This is not a loophole. This is the entire point of the structure. Grandma Opal had not stumbled into this arrangement. She had built it carefully, over more than a year, with the specific knowledge that it needed to be unassailable. By January, the letters stopped. Bennett and I talked a lot during that period. More than we had in years, maybe. About his family. About what we wanted our life to look like going forward. About the particular exhaustion of being in proximity to people who define family as hierarchy, rather than as care. He was honest with me in ways he had been working up to for a long time, and I was honest back. And it wasn't easy, but it was real. He called his father in February. I don't know everything that was said because I was not in the room. I know it lasted 45 minutes. I know Bennett came out of the bedroom, afterward, and sat down at the kitchen table, and was quiet for a while. Then he said, I told him that the way he treated you was not acceptable, and that if he wanted a relationship with Vivi, things would need to change. I asked what Frederick said. Bennett thought about it. He said he'd always done what was best for the family. Of course he did, I said, and I told him that you were the family. I looked at my husband across our kitchen table and thought, not for the first time, that the man I had chosen was worth every difficult thing that had come with choosing him. The farmhouse is 20 minutes outside of Waynesville, at the end of a gravel road that curves twice before you see it. The first time I drove out there after everything was settled. After the paperwork, after the attorney meetings, after the letters stopped. It was early April and the dogwoods were doing their April thing, which in western North Carolina is almost unreasonably beautiful. I went alone. Vivi was at school. Bennett offered to come and I told him I wanted to go by myself the first time. I had been to the farmhouse before. Plenty of times, for holidays and the occasional summer weekend when Grandma Opal would invite the grandchildren. But I had always arrived as a guest. I had always parked in the small gravel lot, beside the barn, and knocked on the front door and waited to be let in. This time I drove down the gravel road, and parked and sat in the car for a moment. The house was white with green shutters. The porch wrapped around the front and one side. The garden was winter bare, but you could see the structure of it, the careful organization of beds and borders that had been tended for decades. There was bird feeder off the east corner of the porch and something was at it, a pair of goldfinches. I thought, though they were pale in their winter coloring. I had a key now. I got out of the car and walked up the porch steps, on the doormat, not fancy, just a plain, brown rectangle. There were faint initials pressed into the fiber from years of boots and shoes. O.H. Opal Holt. I stood on that mat for a second and thought about how long she had stood on it herself, how many mornings she had come through that door, and how many evenings she had come home to it. Come home to it whenever you need to. I unlocked the door and went in. The house smelled like wood and old books, and faintly like the lavender sachets she kept in her linen closet. It was quiet in the particular way that spaces are quiet when they've been inhabited for a long time and recently emptied. Not an empty quiet, a held quiet. I walked through the front room and into the kitchen and stood at the window that looked out over the back garden and the field beyond it. The mountains were visible on the far edge, still with a little snow on the upper elevations. On the kitchen counter, someone, Ms. Tran I think, or maybe a neighbor who'd been keeping an eye on the place, had left a small stack of mail and beneath it, tucked deliberately, a folded dish towel. I recognized it. It was one of the Christmas dish towels, the ones she'd sent with the bread. I picked it up and unfolded it, and there, written along the hem in her very small and precise handwriting, was the recipe, just the recipe. Flour, water, yeast, salt. Proofing time, bake temperature, her annotations in the margins. Don't rush the proof and this dough forgives you if you're patient. I stood in her kitchen, my kitchen now I suppose, though it would take me a long time to really feel that, and I read the recipe twice. Then I went to find the bread pans. Frederick did not come around easily. I want to be honest about that. There was no moment at Christmas where he looked across the table and saw me differently, and everything realigned. People like Frederick don't have those moments, or if they do, they have them privately and slowly and never quite announce them. What happened was more gradual. He called Bennett in the spring. He called again in the summer. By fall, he was asking after Vivi. Not after me, exactly, but adjacent to me, the way you edge towards something you've decided you might need. Loretta was different. She started texting me. Small things. A photo of flowers she'd seen at a garden center that reminded her of the farmhouse. An article about a book she thought I'd like. Nothing large, but steady. I responded to everyone. I am not naive about what the money and the property changed. I know it shifted something in the power structure of that family. I know that Frederick's particular brand of dismissal functions on the premise that he holds the resources, and therefore the authority, and when that premise shifted, something in his position did too. I'm not proud that it took that to change things. I think it reveals something uncomfortable about how that kind of family operates. But I also know that's not what Grandma Opal intended. Or not only. She wasn't trying to buy me status in her son's eyes. She was trying to give me something that had nothing to do with his eyes at all. A place that was mine, that didn't require his approval to stand on. She gave me ground. That's the thing I keep thinking about, when I think about that Sunday phone call, and the dish towel recipe, and the expression on Ms. Tran's face when she said she was very thorough. Grandma Opal looked at her family, and at the way her family worked, and she decided that the best thing she could do for me was not to argue my case to them. She didn't try to change Frederick's mind, or extract an apology, or broker some reconciliation. She just quietly made sure I had somewhere to stand. Vivi asked me once, when we were out at the farmhouse in the summer, and she was doing cartwheels in the backfield in the way that 9-year-olds do when they discover flat ground, whether we owned this place now, or if it was still Grandma Opal's. I thought about that for a second. It's ours, I said. She gave it to us. Why? Vivi asked mid-cartwheel. Because she wanted us to have a home base. Vivi landed and looked around at the field and the mountains, and the porch with the bird feeder and the garden, where things were starting to come back in after the winter. Good call, she said, and then turned another cartwheel. I laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in a long time. The kind that comes from somewhere uncomplicated. I sat on the porch steps in the late afternoon light and I thought about all the Sunday phone calls and the bread, and the small handwriting on the hem of a dish towel. And I thought about how sometimes the most profound things people do for you are the things they do, quietly, without announcing them, without needing credit, without asking anything in return. Grandma Opal never once said to me, I know what you endure. She never said, I think my son is wrong. She never put me in the position of validating my own hurt or arguing for my own worth. She just called every Sunday. She called me Juniper, She gave me somewhere to come home to. And in the end, I think that was everything.